Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, earlier this week, Donald Trump began his second term in the White House, and his presidency and what it might mean for Irish businesses has caused an air of uncertainty. So how should business leaders deal with such events? Shane Cradock is a performance coach, and he joins us now to explain all. Shane, start by providing us with an insight into your journey to becoming a performance coach.
Hi, Karl. Great to be here. About 30 years ago, I was working in the corporate world. I was working in a multinational kind of environment. I had a severe breakdown. I didn't have any plan to do what I'm doing now. But out of that breakdown, luckily, I got through it. But what I learned, which was critical to what I'm doing now, was basically mental resilience, how to recover from setbacks. And I just got very, very passionate, obsessed with what I would call now the inner game of business and life. And it hasn't been a straight line, Karl. Nothing really is anyway. But over time, I got into coaching, got into consultancy, got into training, got into leadership development. And now, today, whatever, 30 years later, I work primarily with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and senior business leaders to help them, I suppose, be at the top of their game in what is a very volatile, uncertain environment.
And talk to us about the inner game of business and life.
In every field, I think now there's a recognition that the inner side of things is important. Like in sports now, if you don't have a dedicated performance coach or sports psychologist, you're kind of taken as not being serious. And that kind of has helped me in my job, working primarily with business leaders, to open their minds. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, you know, what's key to your success and actually your happiness in life is really what's going on inside you. Like, you could have everything going for in terms of talent, experience, but if you're stressed, if you're doubtful, if you're feeling insecure, if you just have brain fog, which is way more common now than ever, it just kind of dampens your ability to execute your talent. And so really, the inner game is about understanding how to move the variables inside you so that you can perform at your best.
And what organisations have you worked with from a performance perspective, and what approach do you follow with your clients?
I've been lucky enough to work with companies like Apple, Dell, Prada, you know, that kind of level. And also then entrepreneurial companies. I've worked with the Louis Copeland Group, Aspire Technology, VUCA, which converted into Naturgy, and John Paul Construction. Like there's a lot of different organizations that I would work with. Saba Restaurant Group in Ireland and Dublin. So there's lots of different. I've worked in over 60 industries, Karl. And then the approach that I take has evolved over the years. But now the approach I take really is, you know, I'm very upfront in saying that if I'm working with you, I'm gonna work with you on you first, because what I realized was if the leader of the team or the business wasn't quite right, that would ripple into their business. So, and then the mental side of it, from my point of view, was the absolute top of the agenda, because, like, in particular, you think about something like confidence or clarity, it's a mental skill. And there are ways to improve that once you understand how to manage yourself. So I generally start with that so that they start to understand and get a feel for, and then experiment with, actually, this does make a difference to me. I'm clearer, I'm calmer, I'm more focused, my energy is better, my sleep is better. So I very much focus on that. And then we will look then at, okay, well, let's look at what's the vision here. What are you trying to do? And then look at the mechanics around making that happen.
And over the last 8.5 years, have you noticed any change in your clients' requirements from a coaching perspective?
Absolutely. There's much more interest in the inner game, in the mental side. I think because of the increased uncertainty over the last 8 years and the volatility and the disruption in the business world, and I think then also maybe sports has helped here as well, in terms of what I said earlier on about psychology and having people around mindset, that there's a real interest and openness, and business leaders, you know, if something works for a leader, they will talk about it to other people. And really that's what I'm most interested in, is like, if you can get results that are meaningful, then people will talk about it. So in Ireland, like there's a real, over the last 20 years, but in particular the last, I would say 6 years, there's been a real growth in the interest in the area of mindset, resilience, the inner game, and just taking it on to different levels. So that's very encouraging to me, and I'm very optimistic about what I see coming for Irish leaders because of that.
And on the topic of the mind, you mentioned brain fog. What's the root cause of that, and how do you go about overcoming it?
Well, we could talk about this now for a while, but in simple terms, the root cause of brain fog is actually having too busy a mind. That's the root cause of it. And, you know, most people think, well, hang on, sure, having a busy mind, is that not just normal because of what's going on around me. Well, actually, it's not. Like the busier your mind gets, the foggier your mind gets, in my experience. Now, there's different ways to kind of address that, but again, go back to the sports analogy. Like if you, like 20 years ago, strength and conditioning coaches probably wasn't a thing. It's now taken very seriously. Say even in rugby, you'd have a strength and conditioning coach, professional, amateur. Like it's really taken very seriously. You got to be at your best to perform at your best on the pitch. And what I say to my clients is, look, you got to take an inner strength approach to your conditioning for you as a leader. And when you do that, then the brain fog reduces. But part of that as well, Karl, is learning how to manage your mind in relation to how you use technology. You know, like, listen, mental noise wasn't a thing really. I used to talk about mental noise about 10 years ago, and it wasn't really a thing, but like it's gotten worse. So people are distracted by email, text messages, WhatsApp, Teams. It's relentless. Like this amazing gadget that I'm talking to you on my phone, like it's amazing, right? But it's also very, very dangerous when it's misused. And if you don't understand how your mind is with technology and the fact that, you know, a busy mind is actually bad for business, then you won't really focus on actually fixing it.
And of course, last Monday, Donald Trump was inaugurated as the president of the US for the second time. The potential impact of his tenure on Ireland has made the headlines since the election in November. But are Irish leaders genuinely concerned by his presidency, or has this been exaggerated?
I think, for me, it probably has been exaggerated. I think Donald Trump coming in, you know, regardless of whatever political persuasion you are, some people will look at it as a good thing, some people look at it as a bad thing. Most of the people I work with are very entrepreneurial, and I'll always get them to ask this question no matter what happens. No matter what happens, where's the opportunity? And, you know, I'll often say to clients, listen, we went through this big, massive crash in 2008, 2009, 10. And out of that, you know, yeah, maybe, you know, there was difficult challenges. It was a very difficult time, but there's great innovation, great improvements, great opportunities. New businesses started. I saw the same thing happen again with the pandemic. And if we can kind of get through that and come out the other side, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get punched or kicked, but if you're conditioned in yourself to kind of go, okay, I'm focusing on myself having, you know, a clear mind under pressure. I've worked on my inner conditioning, so I'm actually in a reasonably good space. Then when I ask a question, which is like, well, where's the opportunity? You're more inclined to see potential answers. If you're stressed and go down the spiral of a downward loop of emotional reaction, which I do see a lot of leaders getting distracted with the political uncertainty. That the political uncertainty is a sideshow. If you're calm, clear under pressure, and you're a good leader, and you've worked on yourself, and you focus on, well, where's the opportunity? That's a great question for your mind, because you're more likely to see something that will benefit you than others who are distracted won't.
So talk to us about VUCA environments and the tools which leaders require in order to react appropriately to such geopolitical developments.
Well, VUCA it's a four-letter acronym, VUCA, and it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's a term, an acronym that came out of the U.S. military, and they used it as a kind of a term to describe an environment where literally anything could happen. So if you guys we're in a VUCA environment, it just means watch your back. Like anything can happen at any time. The normal rules do not apply. And the leadership world started to adapt that phrase about 10 years ago. But it's becoming a bit more well-known, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years. And from my perspective, I see it all the time. But essentially, right now, we are in a VUCA environment in the world where basically, and you're seeing it happen, the unexpected will happen. You know, people didn't predict back in 2016 that Donald Trump would become president. There's lots of stuff that's happened since a pandemic. Who could have predicted that? Like, so we're in a time where like literally anything can happen. And for most people, you know, the human brain is wired to be much more attracted to potential threats than otherwise. So you have to work on yourself to make sure that you're kind of like not getting into a catastrophic, you know, projection in your mind to make things worse. So a VUCA environment can be stressful for people because it brings in a lot of uncertainty and people like to have control. But that kind of predictability is kind of gone. So what can you predict? Well, I can focus, like what can I control? I can focus on my state of mind. I can focus on my mindset. I can focus on looking after myself, working on my own mental conditioning. And then once I'm clear like that, go back to the skill, then with that kind of a mindset, which is very strong, then if I focus on a vision of what I'm trying to create, I'm much more inclined to find ways to adapt around the inevitable obstacles that are going to occur. And we're in a time where, we haven't talked about artificial intelligence. There's incredible disruption coming over the next 10 years. But within that, there's incredible opportunity. And so the people that I'm connected to and working with, I'm just focused with them on keeping them at their best and then ask the question, where's the opportunity in this? And then look for that gap and then take it and go. And I think if nothing else, Karl, if people even listening to this, regardless of whether they have their own business or not, if they just said, well, actually, do you know what? What's one thing I could do to improve my own mental state? There's probably something that they know that they could start. There's so much around us at the moment that you can use. But we're living in a time where there's so much information, where people know probably a lot of what to do, but very often they just don't do it. And the last thing I'll say to you is that, one of the top the big research done in the last couple of years around, for leaders, what's the number one skill in leadership going forwards for the next 10 years? And I think it was 86% of the leaders surveyed, I think it was about 50,000 leaders, said that the number one skill, mental skill, was strategic thinking. But in the same survey, they also said that most of them don't do it because they're too busy. That to me is not acceptable. That if it's that important, that's the opportunity. The opportunity is to make time and bring the right mindset into strategic thinking time. So that's something that should be very consistent. That's an opportunity for anybody listening here who is a leader.
And Shane, how should a business leader approach decision-making in a VUCA world?
Look, I think the number one thing is to first of all look at your state of mind. If you're coming in trying to make decisions in a VUCA world where you're very stressed, you've got brain fog, that is putting yourself in a very tricky position, and you're most likely going to make bad decisions. People make bad decisions when they're tired, and at the moment, like most of the research is showing, Karl, that about 66% of the workforce is on the edge of burnout. Like that's a really scary statistic. So if you're on the edge of burnout, it's very difficult to make really good decisions. So the weird thing is, paradoxically, is to make better decisions, look after yourself a bit more. Up your game on your physical fitness, up your game on your mental fitness, work on actually your mental relaxation. Bizarrely, moving in that direction, it allows you then to look at, you're more equipped to have better clarity, which will help in making better decisions. And then when you're in that kind of a state, doing things like scenario planning, scenario thinking, experimentation with new projects or even new ideas, getting feedback from peers, you're more inclined to kind of hear and see what you're meant to see. And all of that then means you just make a better decision.
And for anybody that is encountering high levels of stress due to VUCA, how can those stress levels be regulated?
Well, you can start with different techniques. There's a huge amount of techniques or even apps that you can use, like, for meditation or mindfulness. But what I would say to you is there's a lot more available in terms of a deeper level. And I would just encourage people to explore the different options online. They can check out my website, shanecradock.com. There's different programs. We're in a different time now where, it's not so much about getting information. Find a way to actually apply what you know. I was talking to somebody yesterday who kept on going on about meditation, and I said, and how often do you meditate? And they said, well, actually, I don't really do it. So there's this gap between just because you read it or even hear it on a radio station or wherever, start with something that you know. But I'll tell you my favorite one of all for regulating my stress. It goes back to actually 30 years ago, Karl, when I first had a conversation with a counsellor. And I said to him, look, I'm really stressed. I'm miserable. Just give me one thing I can do to help that. And he said, Shane, go for a slow walk every day for 20 minutes to 30 minutes. If you can do longer, that's even better. But do minimum 20. Try to get to 30. And when you're walking, just slow your body down. Because when you slow your body down, it slows your mind down. And he said, to help that, instead of thinking when you're walking, just focus on your five senses, like what you see, what you hear, how you feel, what you taste, what you smell. He said, do that. He said, and it's free. You can start today, and away you go. And you know what, Karl? I still do it today because it's my favorite thing, because it works, and it's just so simple. So if somebody's listening and they're feeling stressed, and I'm sure there are, because we're in a time where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of stress, that would be the simplest thing that I would say, and maybe the most profound thing, because it works.
It's good advice. And what about for those that feel insecure? I think it affects us all at some stage. What's the best way to deal with that?
It's funny. I used to think that maybe I was the only person feeling insecure. And I realized over time, as I started to work with very successful people, I realized, oh, they get insecure too. It's a human thing. I don't know anybody who doesn't get insecure. But the difference is sometimes is that people who are very successful generally they kind of know that insecurity, if they just let it, it'll just pass. They don't get caught up with the thinking that comes with insecurity. So it's a separate conversation perhaps, but I think you have to realize that your feeling is completely generated by your thinking, but you don't have to believe your thinking. Sometimes we think things and think, oh, that's reality. Most of the time it's not. But if you can understand that your feeling is created by your thinking, and if you sit with something and just let it pass, it will pass. But if you're doing all the other stuff that we talked about here today, Karl, in terms of, whether it's walking or exercise, looking after your mind, doing something that helps with that, what you generally find is that those moments of insecurity become less, definitely, over time in your lifetime.
And Shane, finally, beyond the leaders themselves, what is involved in building resilience amongst the company's employees?
Well, I'd have maybe strong views on this, but, because I know companies, and on one level maybe it's better than nothing, but companies will have people coming in talking about resilience and everything else, which is fine. But I think if you think about business culture, people talk about culture being so important. Culture eats strategy for breakfast is the saying, and I also subscribe to that. But from my experience, unless the leaders and the leader in a business is role modeling what we're talking about here over this conversation, in terms of looking after themselves, in terms of showing that resilience, that grit, in terms of being vulnerable as well, they will set the tone in the business. They will role model it. And we're kind of like kids, even though we're adults. We kind of tend to role model what we see. And if the owner is stressed and maybe is very moody and maybe, isn't quite present or is distracted, essentially that's what's going to ripple into the business. Your mood is contagious. Like, it flows through your business like electricity through wires. It's very, very contagious. And most leaders think that that's not true, but it is true. And I would encourage, so if you're looking to build resilience in your team, as a leader, first look at yourself. Where are you? What are you doing? How are you? What are you role modeling? What's really going on? And improve that, and then it'll help everything else.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was performance coach Shane Cradock. And I'd like to thank Shane for sharing his personal and professional insights with us this morning.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.